The morning sun cast a golden glow over Kensington Palace as the royal household began another seemingly ordinary day. Inside the private quarters, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis were getting ready for what appeared to be a routine family breakfast. The two young royals had always been close, sharing secrets and giggles that only siblings could understand. But on this particular morning, something felt different in the air. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was organizing the children's schedules when she noticed Charlotte whispering intently to her younger brother. The 9-year-old princess had a serious expression on her face, quite unlike her usual cheerful demeanor. Louis, who was 6 years old, nodded solemnly as his sister spoke. Their mother watched them curiously but didn't interrupt, assuming it was just another childhood game or secret. The family gathered around the breakfast table in their private dining room. Prince William joined them, fresh from an early morning meeting with palace officials. The atmosphere was warm and familiar, with the clinking of cutlery and the aroma of fresh pastries filling the room. Prince George, the eldest at 11, was discussing his upcoming school project about environmental conservation. The conversation flowed naturally until Charlotte suddenly placed her small hand on the table. Everyone turned to look at the young princess. Her blue eyes were bright with determination, and she sat up straighter in her chair. Louis immediately stopped eating and looked at his sister with supportive anticipation. Catherine and William exchanged glances, sensing that something important was about to happen. The room fell into an expectant silence. Charlotte cleared her throat and began to speak. Her voice was steady, but filled with emotion, as she told her parents that she and Louis had been talking for weeks about something that troubled them deeply. They had noticed things during their public appearances and family outings that made them think. The young princess explained that they saw people struggling, children without enough food, and families living in difficult conditions. What shocked William and Catherine most was not just what their children were saying, but the depth of understanding behind their words. Charlotte spoke about how she felt uncomfortable wearing expensive clothes when she knew other children didn't have warm jackets for winter. Louis chimed in, his small voice adding that he didn't want birthday parties with expensive gifts anymore. He wanted to help people instead. The children's words came from genuine concern and compassion. They had been quietly observing the world around them, despite being so young. Charlotte mentioned a school friend whose family had lost their home, and Louis talked about a documentary he had seen about children in hospitals. Their parents listened in amazement as the two youngest royals articulated feelings and thoughts that seemed beyond their years. Prince William leaned forward, his expression a mixture of pride and surprise. He asked his children what they wanted to do about these feelings. Charlotte and Louis looked at each other before Charlotte pulled out a piece of paper from her pocket. It was a list, written in her neat handwriting, of ideas they had come up with together. The list included donating their old toys, organizing charity events at school, and asking their parents to take them to visit places where they could help. Catherine felt tears welling up in her eyes as she listened to her children. She had always tried to raise them with awareness of their privilege and responsibility, but she hadn't expected them to internalize these values so deeply at such young ages. The princess's mother reached across the table and held Charlotte's hand. While William placed his hand on Louis's shoulder, the breakfast conversation continued for over an hour, and far longer than usual. The family discussed what was possible and what the children truly understood about the complexities of helping others. William explained that their desire to help was beautiful. They needed to understand that real change required careful planning and proper channels. Charlotte nodded seriously, showing she understood the responsibility that came with their position. Louis, despite being younger, surprised everyone with his insight. He said that he knew they couldn't help everyone, but they could help someone. His simple logic touched his parents' hearts. The young prince explained that even small actions mattered, like sharing toys with children who had none, or spending time with lonely elderly people. His words reflected a wisdom that seemed unusual for a 6-year-old child. As the breakfast ended, William and Catherine promised their children that they would discuss their ideas seriously with the palace staff and advisors. They assured Charlotte and Louis that their feelings mattered and their desire to make a difference was important. The children seemed satisfied with this promise, but but there was a determination in their eyes that suggested this was only the beginning. Later that morning, after the children went to their tutors, William and Catherine sat together in their private study. They were both deeply moved by what had just happened. The prince and princess had always known their children were special, but this morning had revealed something unexpected. Their youngest two children had developed a social conscience that many adults never achieve. Catherine mentioned that she had noticed Charlotte becoming more thoughtful recently, but she hadn't realized the extent of her daughter's observations. William admitted that he had caught Louis asking questions about homeless people they passed during drives through London, but he thought it was just childish curiosity. They both realized they had underestimated their children's capacity for empathy and understanding. The couple began discussing how to handle this situation properly. They knew that if word got out about what Charlotte and Louis had said, the media would have a field day. The press was always eager for royal stories, especially ones involving the children. But more importantly, William and Catherine wanted to honor their children's genuine feelings without turning it into a publicity stunt. They decided to consult with senior palace officials and charity experts to see how they could facilitate their children's desire to help in age-appropriate ways. The prince and princess wanted to protect Charlotte and Louis's innocence, while also nurturing their compassionate instincts. It was a delicate balance that required careful consideration. As news of the breakfast conversation began to circulate among trusted palace staff, reactions were mixed. Some were deeply touched by the children's words, while others worried about the implications. The royal family had always been involved in charity work, but having such young members expressing such strong opinions was unprecedented in recent times. By afternoon, William had called a private meeting with his key advisors. He explained what had happened at breakfast, being careful to emphasize that this came entirely from the children themselves. The prince made it clear that he and Catherine wanted to support their children's wishes while maintaining appropriate boundaries. The advisors listened carefully, understanding that this was a sensitive situation that needed thoughtful handling. Meanwhile, Charlotte and Louis went about their day, attending lessons and playing in the palace gardens. They didn't realize the impact their breakfast conversation had made. To them, they had simply expressed feelings that had been building up for weeks. The young royals continued their normal routines, unaware that their simple words were about to change more than they could imagine. The palace corridors buzzed with quiet activity as staff members went about their duties with practiced efficiency. However, beneath the surface of routine, something unusual was happening. Word had spread among the household staff about the breakfast conversation, and everyone seemed to be discussing the young royal's unexpected declaration. Kitchen staff whispered while preparing lunch. Security personnel exchanged meaningful glances. Even the gardeners seemed to know something significant had occurred. Prince William spent the afternoon in consecutive meetings with various advisors and charity organization leaders. He wanted to understand exactly what options existed for involving young children in meaningful charitable work without exposing them to inappropriate situations or exploiting their royal status. The discussions were intense and sometimes challenging. As everyone tried to balance multiple considerations, one advisor suggested that perhaps the children were simply going through a phase and would forget about their concerns within days. William firmly rejected this notion, explaining that he had seen genuine conviction in his children's eyes. The prince emphasized that dismissing their feelings would be a mistake that could damage their developing social consciousness. He wanted to take Charlotte and Louis seriously while providing proper guidance. Catherine, meanwhile, had her own series of conversations. She reached out to child psychologists and education experts who specialized in developing empathy in young children. The princess wanted to understand whether her children's behavior was typical for their ages, or if it represented something exceptional. The experts she consulted were intrigued by what she described and suggested that the children were showing remarkable emotional intelligence. By evening, when the children had finished their lessons and activities, Catherine decided to have a more private conversation with Charlotte. She found her daughter in the palace library, quietly reading a book about wildlife conservation. The princess mother sat beside her daughter and gently asked Charlotte to tell her more about how she had been feeling lately. Charlotte closed her Buchan looked at her mother with those serious blue eyes that seemed to carry thoughts beyond her years. She explained that it started several months ago when she noticed a girl at school always wearing the same worn shoes. Charlotte had asked the girl about it and learned that her family couldn't afford new ones. Since that moment, the young princess said she couldn't stop thinking about children who didn't have what they needed. The 9-year-old described how she started paying attention during public appearances. She noticed people in crowds who looked tired and worried. She saw children waving at them who seemed thin and pale. Charlotte told her mother that she felt guilty every time she got a new dress or toy, knowing that other children had nothing. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke, revealing the emotional weight she had been carrying. Catherine listened without interrupting, heart aching for her daughter's burden. She realized that Charlotte had been processing these complex feelings alone for months before finally sharing them with Louis and then their parents. The princess mother explained gently that feeling compassion was beautiful, but Charlotte shouldn't feel guilty for her circumstances. Instead, she could use her position to help others, which is exactly what she was trying to do. Charlotte seemed relieved to have her mother's understanding. She asked if people would laugh at her for caring so much about these things. Catherine assured her daughter that truly good people would never laugh at compassion. The mother and daughter sat together for a long time, discussing what it meant to be privileged and how to use that privilege responsibly. It was a conversation that many parents never have with their children, but it felt necessary and right in another part of the palace. William had a similar heart-to-heart with Louis. The 6-year-old was playing with his toy cars when his father joined him on the floor. William asked his youngest son what had made him want to give up birthday presents. Louis looked up with those innocent eyes that still held so much childhood wonder, yet reflected surprising depth. Louis explained in a simple way that he already had so many toys he couldn't play with them all. He had seen a television program about a children's hospital where kids didn't have toys because their families couldn't afford them. The young prince said it seemed silly for him to get more toys when he already had plenty and other children had none. His logic was straightforward and pure, untainted by the complex justifications adults often make. William felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. He was proud that his son had developed such empathy, but worried about the pressure Louis might feel as he grew older and understood more about his royal role. The prince explained to Louis that his generous heart was wonderful, but he should still be allowed to enjoy his childhood and receive gifts on his birthday. The key was finding balance. Louis thought about this for a moment before suggesting that maybe he could have a smaller party and ask guests to bring donations for charity instead of presents for him. William was impressed by this compromise and agreed they could explore that option. Father and son continued playing with cars, but the conversation had deepened their bond in a meaningful way. That evening, the entire family gathered for dinner in their private quarters. The atmosphere was different from breakfast, less tense but more thoughtful. George, who had been at school during the morning conversation, been filled in by his parents, and was processing the information in his own way. The 11th asked his siblings thoughtful questions about their feelings and ideas. Charlotte and Louis explained their thoughts to their older brother, who listened with the seriousness of someone approaching his teenage years. George admitted that he had similar feelings sometimes, but hadn't known how to express them, he said. He often felt the weight of expectation and wondered what he could do that would matter beyond ceremonial duties. His confession surprised his parents, who realized all 3 children were grappling with their identities and purposes. The family dinner turned into an open forum where everyone shared their thoughts and feelings. William and Catherine were honest with their children about the challenges of royal life and charitable work. They explained that helping others was important, but needed to be done thoughtfully and sustainably. The prince and princess emphasized that their children's education and well-being came first, but there was definitely room for meaningful involvement in causes they cared about. As the conversation progressed, Charlotte brought up the list she had shown at breakfast. She and Louis had added more ideas throughout the day, showing they had been thinking seriously about practical actions. Some ideas were adorably childish, like having a lemonade stand to raise money, while others showed surprising sophistication, like organizing a toy drive at their school or visiting children's hospitals. William and Catherine carefully reviewed each idea with their children, explaining which ones were feasible and which might be difficult due to security concerns or protocol. The children accepted the limitations with understanding maturity. grateful that their parents were taking them seriously rather than dismissing their ideas outright. This validation meant everything to Charlotte and Louis. The evening ended with the family making a plan. They would spend the next few weeks researching charities that focused on children's welfare and poverty relief. Charlotte and Louis would be allowed to choose one organization to support actively with age-appropriate involvement. William and Catherine would arrange for the children to learn more about social issues in ways that were educational but not trimmaging. As Charlotte and Louis went to bed that night, both felt a sense of relief and excitement. They had been heard and taken seriously by their parents. Their words had mattered. The young royals didn't yet realize that their simple breakfast declaration had set in motion events that would eventually reach beyond the palace walls and touch the hearts of people across the nation. In their private bedroom, William and Catherine reflected on the extraordinary day. They held hands and discussed how to proceed with supporting their children's compassionate instincts while protecting them from potential exploitation or overwhelm. Both agreed that what had happened was special and needed careful nurturing. Their children had shown them something pure and important, and they were determined not to let it be corrupted by politics or publicity. The prince and princess knew that, eventually, the public would learn about Charlotte and Louis's concerns and desires to help. When that happened, they wanted to ensure the story was told accurately and respectfully. But for now, they agreed to keep things private while they figured out the best path forward. The children's well-being and genuine motivations had to remain the priority above all else. 3 weeks had passed since that memorable breakfast conversation, and the Wales family had been busy behind the scenes. Catherine had arranged several educational sessions for Charlotte and Louis, with charity workers who specialized in explaining complex social issues to children. These sessions took place in the privacy of Kensington Palace. Away from media attention and public scrutiny, the children learned about food insecurity, homelessness, and the struggles many families faced with rising costs of living. The charity representatives were skilled at presenting information in age-appropriate ways, using stories and examples that the young royals could understand without becoming frightened or overwhelmed. Charlotte took notes in a small journal her mother had given her, while Louis asked countless questions with his characteristic curiosity. One afternoon, a woman named Sarah, who ran a local food bank, came to speak with the children. She brought photographs of the families her organization helped, carefully selected to show need without being distressing. Sarah explained how a simple donation of groceries could make the difference between a family eating dinner or going hungry. Charlotte studied the photos intently, and Louis asked if they could visit the food bank to see how it worked. William and Catherine had anticipated this request. They had already discussed with their security team the possibility of arranging a private, unannounced visit to a charitable organization. The logistics were complicated, as any royal outing required careful planning and security measures. However, seeing the genuine interest in their children's faces, the parents were determined to make it happen. The visit was arranged for the following week. On a quiet Tuesday morning, with minimal staff and maximum security precautions, the family traveled to a community center in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of London. The center ran a food bank, a homework club for children, and provided support services for struggling families. The staff had been informed that special visitors were coming but had been sworn to secrecy about their identity. When Charlotte and Louis walked through the doors with their parents and George, the staff members could barely contain their surprise. The young royals were dressed simply, without the formal clothes they wore to official events. Charlotte wore jeans and a comfortable sweater, while Louis had on his favorite dinosaur shirt. They looked like any other children, which was exactly what their parents wanted. The director of the center, a warm woman named Patricia, welcomed them with genuine kindness, rather than formal ceremony. She showed the family around, explaining each area's purpose and the people they helped. Charlotte and Louis walked slowly through the food bank section, looking at shelves stocked with canned goods, pasta, rice, and other essentials. Patricia explained that everything here had been donated by community members and local businesses. Louis asked how many people came to the food bank each week. Patricia's answer surprised the family. She said that over 200 families visited regularly, and that number had been growing. Many were working families whose wages simply couldn't cover both rent and food. Some were elderly people living on small pensions. Others were single parents trying to feed their children on limited resources. The reality was more widespread than the young royals had imagined. In the homework club area, Charlotte met children her own age who came after school because their homes were too crowded or chaotic for studying. She spoke with a girl named Emma who was working on a mathematics assignment. Emma didn't recognize Charlotte as a princess, seeing only another girl showing interest in her work. The two chatted about school and favorite subjects. Finding common ground despite their vastly different circumstances, Louis gravitated toward the younger children's area. Where a small group was playing with donated toys, he sat down and joined their game without hesitation, his natural friendliness putting the other children at ease. One little boy showed Louis his favorite toy car, explaining proudly that he had received it from the center's donation box. Louis smiled and said it was a very nice car, meaning every word. George, meanwhile, was having his own awakening. The eldest prince spent time talking with teenagers who volunteered at the center. They told him about their lives, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. One young man his age explained that he volunteered because his family had once needed the food bank's help. And now that things were better, he wanted to give back. George was moved by this perspective. William and Catherine observed their children's interactions with quiet pride. They watched Charlotte listening intently to the stories people shared, saw Louis playing without any sense of superiority or difference, and noticed George engaging thoughtfully with peers whose experiences were so different from his own. The visit was having exactly the impact they had hoped for. Patricia invited the family to help sort donations that had arrived that morning. Together, they organized canned goods, checked expiration dates, and arranged items on shelves. Charlotte worked efficiently, her face concentrated as she made sure everything was properly placed. Louis carried lighter items, determined to help despite his smaller size. The work was simple, but meaningful. The children could see the direct impact of their efforts. During a break, the family sat in Patricia's small office with cups of tea and biscuits. Patricia spoke honestly about the challenges the center faced. Funding was always uncertain, demand was increasing, and they often ran short of essential items. She explained that donations of money were actually more helpful than food sometimes, as they could buy exactly what was needed and negotiate better prices with wholesalers. Charlotte asked if their royal position could help the center in any way. Patricia looked at William and Catherine before answering carefully. She said that awareness was incredibly valuable. If more people knew about the extent of need in their communities, more might be inspired to help. She emphasized that it wasn't about publicity for the center specifically, but about highlighting the broader issues that affected so many. This conversation planted a seed in Charlotte's mind. She began thinking about how she might use her voice, even as a child, to draw attention to causes she cared about. Louis, listening to his sister's questions, added his own thoughts about making sure people knew that helping others felt good and wasn't hard to do. Their parents exchanged glances, recognizing that this visit was transforming abstract concern into concrete understanding. As the visit concluded, Charlotte and Louis thanked Patricia and the staff for letting them come. The young princess asked if they could return sometime, perhaps to help again. Patricia assured them they would be welcome any time, though she understood the complications their position created. The warmth and genuineness of the interaction touched everyone present. On the drive back to Kensington Palace, the family was unusually quiet. Each person was processing what they had seen and experienced. Finally, Charlotte broke the silence by saying that she wanted to do more. She didn't just want to visit occasionally. She wanted to make a real difference. Louis immediately agreed, his small voice echoing his sister's determination. William explained gently that making a real difference was a long-term commitment, not a single action. He told his children that their enthusiasm was wonderful, but they needed to think carefully about what was sustainable and appropriate for their ages. Catherine added that there were many ways to help, and they would figure out together what made the most sense for Charlotte and Louis. George surprised everyone by saying he wanted to be involved too. The 11-year-old explained that meeting the teenage volunteers had inspired him. He realized that he could have more purpose in his role than he had previously thought. His parents were pleased to see all three children finding motivation in helping others, each in their own way. That evening, the family gathered again to discuss the day's experiences. Charlotte and Louis talked excitedly about the people they had met and the things they had learned. George shared his conversations with the older volunteers and his thoughts about regular service work. The children's enthusiasm was infectious. Reminding William and Catherine why they had agreed to this visit despite the logistical challenges, the prince and princess explained to their children that they had decisions to make. If they wanted to become more involved in charitable work, it would eventually become public knowledge. The media would write about it, people would have opinions, and there would be increased attention on their family. William wanted his children to understand this reality before committing to any public-facing charity involvement. Charlotte considered this seriously before responding. She said that if people wanted to write about them helping others, that might actually be good because it could inspire more people to help too. Louis nodded in agreement, adding that he didn't mind if people knew as long as they could actually help. Their responses showed a surprising maturity in understanding the potential benefits of their public platform. Family agreed to move forward with developing a more formal involvement in charitable causes. Focusing initially on children's welfare and poverty relief, they would work with palace advisors to create appropriate opportunities for the young royals to participate in meaningful ways. William and Catherine emphasized that this would be done gradually and carefully. The palace communications team was called into an urgent meeting. William and Catherine had decided it was time to share Charlotte and Louis's story with the public. But they wanted it done in a way that honored the children's genuine feelings without turning them into a spectacle. The meeting room was filled with experienced press secretaries, media advisors, and senior palace officials who had handled countless royal announcements over the years. Catherine explained the situation from the beginning, describing that morning breakfast conversation and everything that had followed. She emphasized that this initiative came entirely from the children themselves and was not a manufactured publicity campaign. The princess made it clear that any public statement needed to protect her children's privacy while allowing them to pursue their charitable interests with authenticity. The communications director, a seasoned professional named Margaret, listened carefully before offering her perspective. She acknowledged that stories about royal children always generated significant media interest. But this particular narrative had something special. People would respond positively to seeing such young royals displaying genuine compassion and social awareness. However, Margaret warned that skeptics would question whether the children were being coached or used for publicity purposes. William addressed this concern directly. He suggested that perhaps allowing Charlotte and Louis to speak in their own words, in a controlled setting, might actually dispel doubts about the authenticity of their feelings. The prince proposed a carefully filmed interview or statement where the children could explain their thoughts naturally, without scripts or heavy coaching. This suggestion created some debate among the advisors. Some team members worried that putting young children in front of cameras was risky. Charlotte was only 9 and Louis just 6 years old. They might say something unexpected, become nervous, or fail to articulate their thoughts clearly. However, others argued that this authenticity was precisely what would make people believe in the sincerity of their charitable interests. The discussion went back and forth for over an hour. Finally, a compromise was reached. Instead of a formal interview, it would create a documentary-style short film showing Charlotte and Louis engaged in charitable activities, with brief moments where they could speak naturally about why these causes mattered to them. The film would show, rather than tell, the story of their journey from that breakfast conversation to active involvement in helping others. Over the following weeks, a trusted filmmaker was brought in to capture footage of the children's charitable activities. The camera followed them discreetly during another visit to the community center, showing Charlotte helping organize donations and Louis playing with children from struggling families. The filmmaker captured genuine moments of connection and compassion. Without staging or artificial scenarios, Charlotte was filmed having a simple conversation with Emma, the girl she had met on the first visit who had become a friend. They talked about school, family, and dreams for the future. The difference in their circumstances was evident, but handled with sensitivity. Charlotte asked Emma questions with genuine curiosity, and Emma responded without any sense of intimidation. Their interaction demonstrated how compassion could bridge social divides. Louis was shown, reading stories to younger children at the center's after-school program. His natural warmth and silliness made the children laugh and feel comfortable. In one touching moment, he shared his snacks with a boy who had come to the center hungry, not making a show of it, but simply seeing a need and responding. The camera captured this spontaneous act of kindness beautifully. The filmmaker also included scenes of Charlotte and Louis at home, discussing their experiences with their parents. These conversations were not scripted, allowing the children to express themselves naturally. Charlotte spoke about feeling lucky for what she had and wanting others to have basic necessities too. Louis, in his simpler language, explained that sharing made him happy and that people should help each other because it was nice. George appeared briefly in the film as well, discussing how his younger siblings had inspired him to think more seriously about his future role. The eldest prince spoke thoughtfully about privilege and responsibility, showing that the impact of Charlotte and Louis's compassion was rippling through the entire family. His maturity and self-awareness added another dimension to the story. William and Catherine were also featured, explaining how they had responded to their children's concerns and what they had learned from their sons and daughter. The prince and princess spoke honestly about being surprised by the depth of their children's understanding and proud of their desire to help others. They emphasized that this was a learning journey for the whole family, as the film came together in editing. The Palace team reviewed it carefully. Margaret and her colleagues were pleased with how authentic and touching the footage was. The film showed real people having real experiences, not a staged publicity stunt. Charlotte and Louis came across exactly as they were, caring, thoughtful children who wanted to make a difference in whatever ways they could. The question now was when and how to release the film. Margaret suggested timing it to coincide with an awareness campaign about child poverty in the United Kingdom. This way, Charlotte and Louis's story would contribute to a larger conversation about social issues rather than being just another royal news item. The family agreed this approach aligned with their goals. Preparations began for the film's release. Press materials were prepared, emphasizing the children's genuine initiative and the serious issues at stake. The palace coordinated with major charities working on child welfare and poverty relief, ensuring that the publicity would drive donations and volunteer sign-ups to these organizations. Everything was designed to maximize positive impact while protecting the children. Charlotte and Louis were informed about the upcoming release and what it might mean. Their parents explained that people across the country would see the film and learn about their charitable interests. There might be more attention on them for a while, both positive and negative. The children listened seriously, asking thoughtful questions about what to expect. Charlotte wondered if people would think she was trying to show off or pretend to be better than others. Catherine assured her daughter that good people would recognize genuine compassion when they saw it. Louis asked if more children might want to help after seeing the film. William told his son that was exactly what they hoped would happen. The young prince smiled, pleased that their story might inspire others. The day before the film's release, the palace held a private screening for close family members and key advisors. As the lights dimmed and the film began, everyone watched in respectful silence. The footage was even more powerful on the large screen, showing Charlotte and Louis's journey from concern to action in a way that felt both intimate and inspiring. When the film ended, there was a moment of silence before people began to react. Several staff members were visibly emotional, touched by the genuine compassion displayed by such young children. King Charles, who had attended the screening, approached his grandchildren with pride evident on his face. He told Charlotte and Louis that they had shown the true meaning of royal service. Queen Camilla hugged both children, whispering words of encouragement. Other family members and advisors offered their congratulations and support. The consensus was clear. The film beautifully captured something special and important. It showed that even young children could make a difference, and that the royal family was truly connected to the concerns of ordinary citizens. That night, as Charlotte and Louis prepared for bed, they seemed unusually quiet. Catherine asked if they were nervous about the film being released the next day. Charlotte admitted she was a little scared about what people would say. Louis nodded, adding that he hoped people wouldn't be mean. Their mother reassured them that whatever happened, their family was proud of them for following their hearts. William came to say goodnight, and found both children still awake, their minds clearly racing with thoughts about the next day. The prince sat on Charlotte's bed with Louis cuddled beside him, told them a story about his own mother, Princess Diana, who had used her position to highlight important causes. He explained that she had faced criticism sometimes, but her genuine care for others had ultimately touched millions of hearts. The children listened intently as their father spoke about their grandmother's legacy of compassion. William told them that they were following in her footsteps by caring about people who were struggling. He said that Diana would have been incredibly proud of them, and he certainly was. Charlotte asked if being royal meant they had to help people. William thought carefully before answering that it didn't mean they had to, but it meant they could. And choosing to do so was beautiful. Well, he asked one final question before sleep claimed him. He wanted to know if they had really helped anyone yet, or just talked about helping. William smiled at his son's directness and honesty. He explained that awareness was the first step in helping, and by sharing their story, they were already making a difference. The real work would continue for many years, but they had begun something meaningful. As both children finally drifted off to sleep, William and the morning the film was released began like any other at Kensington Palace, but there was an underlying tension in the air. The documentary had been uploaded to the official royal family channels at 8 o'clock sharp, accompanied by a carefully worded statement from William and Catherine. Within minutes, the response began flooding in from across the country and around the world. Social media platforms exploded with reactions as people watched the touching footage of Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis. The hashtags related to their charitable work started trending immediately. Reaching the top of various platforms within the first hour, people shared clips from the film, particularly the moments where the children spoke in their own words about wanting to help others who had less than they did. Margaret and the communications team monitored the response from their palace offices, tracking sentiment and reach. The initial reactions were overwhelmingly positive. People praised the children's compassion and the parents for raising socially conscious young royals. Many viewers commented that seeing such privileged children care about those less fortunate restored their faith in the younger generation and the monarchy itself. News outlets across Britain picked up the story immediately. Morning television programs dedicated significant time to discussing the film and its implications. Presenters showed clips and invited child psychologists, charity representatives, and royal experts to comment. The general consensus among commentators was that Charlotte and Louis represented something refreshingly genuine in an age of carefully curated public images. However, not all responses were positive. Some critics questioned whether children so young should be involved in public charitable initiatives, arguing that they were too naive to understand complex social issues. Others suggested cynically that the entire thing was a calculated public relations move by William and Catherine to improve the monarchy's image during challenging times for the institution. These critical voices, though fewer in number, gained some traction on social media and in certain publications. Opinion pieces appeared questioning the appropriateness of putting royal children in the spotlight, even for charitable purposes. Some commentators worried that Charlotte and Louis were being used as tools for softening public opinion rather than being allowed to simply be children. Back at Kensington Palace, William and Catherine had anticipated mixed reactions and had prepared themselves and their children for criticism. As they monitored the responses throughout the morning, they focused on the overwhelming majority of positive feedback, while acknowledging the legitimate concerns raised by some critics. The prince and princess had lengthy discussions about whether they should respond to critics or let the film speak for itself. Charlotte and Louis were kept away from media coverage initially. They attended their lessons as usual, their tutors having been briefed to maintain normal routines. However, both children were aware that their film was being released and were curious about how people were reacting. During a break, Charlotte asked her mother if people liked what they had done. Catherine showed her some of the positive messages while carefully filtering out negative comments. The young princess read messages from other children who said the film had inspired them to help in their own communities. Some kids wrote that they were going to organize toy drives at their schools or volunteer at local food banks. Adults shared stories of how watching Charlotte and Louis motivated them to donate to charities or finally get involved in causes they had been thinking about. Charlotte's eyes lit up as she realized their story was creating real impact. Louis was shown drawings and messages sent by young children from around the country. Kids had colored pictures for him, made thank you cards, and sent notes saying they wanted to help others too. The 6-year-old prince was delighted by these responses, especially the colorful drawings. He asked his father if they could reply to everyone who had written. William explained it wouldn't be possible to respond individually, but assured Louis that his appreciation would be communicated by afternoon. The impact of the film had extended beyond social media and news coverage. Charity organizations featured in the documentary reported dramatic increases in donations and volunteer inquiries. Patricia, the director of the community center Charlotte and Louis had visited, contacted the palace to express her gratitude and amazement. Her center had received enough donations in just a few hours to fund operations for several months. Other charities working on child welfare and poverty relief experienced similar surges in support. The palace communications team had prepared a list of recommended organizations, making it easy for people inspired by the film to take action. Donation websites crashed temporarily due to overwhelming traffic. Food banks across the country reported people showing up with boxes of supplies. Citing the young royals as their inspiration, this tangible impact on charitable organizations was exactly what William and Catherine had hoped for. They had never wanted their children's story to be just feel-good content. The goal was always to drive meaningful action on serious social issues. Seeing donations pouring in and volunteers signing up confirmed that the film was achieving its purpose beyond there. Expectations. Educational institutions began reaching out to the palace, asking for permission to use clips from the film and teaching modules about empathy, social responsibility, and civic engagement. Teachers reported that students who watched the documentary wanted to discuss poverty, privilege, and how they could help their communities. The film was sparking important conversations in classrooms across the nation. However, the palace received concerning communication as well. Security teams noted increased attention on the children's public movements. Some organizations wanted Charlotte and Louis to attend their fundraising events or become patron of their causes. Well-meaning but misguided individuals showed up at palace gates hoping to meet the young royals. The security implications of the children's increased. Public profile needed immediate addressing. William called an emergency meeting with security chiefs to review protocols for protecting Charlotte and Louis. The prince made it clear that while he supported his children's charitable interests, their safety and normalcy of childhood were non-negotiable priorities. Enhanced security measures were implemented, and stricter guidelines were established about what types of public appearances would be appropriate for the young royals. The meeting also addressed the flood of requests for the children's involvement in various causes. Margaret suggested creating an official framework for evaluating which opportunities aligned with Charlotte and Louis's genuine interests while being age-appropriate and manageable. Alongside their education, the palace would need to carefully manage expectations and politely decline most requests to prevent the children from being overwhelmed as evening approached. William and Catherine decided it was time to sit down with all 3 children and discuss the day's events more thoroughly. They gathered in the family's private sitting room, away from staff and advisors. The prince and princess wanted this to be an honest family conversation about what had happened and what came next. Charlotte spoke first, saying she was happy that people seemed to like the film but worried about some comments she had overheard staff members discussing. Her parents asked what she had heard. The 9-year-old mentioned that some people thought she and Louis were just pretending to care or being forced by their parents. Catherine could see the hurt in her daughter's eyes at this suggestion. William addressed this directly, explaining that whenever anyone does something good publicly, there will always be skeptics who question their motives. He told Charlotte that she couldn't control what other people thought or said, only her own actions and intentions. The prince emphasized that she knew the truth about her feelings, and that was what mattered. Those who truly understood compassion would recognize it in her actions over time. Louis, ever practical, asked if the people who got help from donations cared whether others thought Charlotte and Louis were pretending. Catherine smiled at her youngest son's wisdom and said that was an excellent point. The families receiving food and support were probably just grateful, regardless of the motivations behind why help arrived. Sometimes Louis's simple perspective cut through complexity in the most helpful ways. George, who had been quieter than usual, finally spoke up. He admitted feeling somewhat overshadowed by his younger siblings' initiative. The 11-year-old prince said he was proud of Charlotte and Louis, but also felt pressure to find his own meaningful causes to champion. His parents reassured him that everyone's journey was different, and he shouldn't feel rushed to compete with his siblings. Catherine explained to George that each of them would find their own path to making a difference. Charlotte's compassion had manifested in concern for children and families in need. Louis's generosity showed in his willingness to share and connect with others. George's strengths might lie in different areas, perhaps environmental conservation given his school project interests, or something else entirely. The important thing was authenticity, not comparison. The family spent the evening discussing how to move forward. William and Catherine laid out some ground rules to protect the children while supporting their charitable endeavor. 3 months had passed since the film's release, and life had settled into a new rhythm for the Wales family. The initial media frenzy had calmed, though interest in Charlotte and Louis's charitable work remained steady. The children had found a comfortable balance between their normal routines and their involvement in helping others, proving that even young royals could make meaningful contributions without sacrificing. Childhood Charlotte had developed a special relationship with the community center where she and Louis volunteered monthly. The staff no longer treated them as celebrities, but as regular helpers who happened to be royal. Emma, the girl Charlotte had befriended, had become a genuine friend beyond the cameras and publicity. The two girls exchanged messages between visits and shared their lives as much as security protocols allowed on one of their recent visits. Charlotte had spent the afternoon helping Emma with a school project about famous women in history. Emma had chosen to research Princess Diana, not realizing initially the personal connection this had for Charlotte. When Emma presented her findings about Diana's charitable work and compassion, Charlotte listened with tears in her eyes. Learning about her grandmother through another child's perspective, Louis had become a beloved figure among the younger children at the center. He arrived each month with the same enthusiasm, ready to play games, read stories, or help with whatever was needed. The 6-year-old prince had a special talent for making other children feel comfortable and valued. His lack of pretense and genuine enjoyment in their company created an atmosphere where everyone felt equal. One memorable afternoon, Louis had organized an impromptu toy swap among the children at the center. He brought toys from home that he no longer played with and encouraged other children to do the same. The event turned into a joyful exchange where everyone went home with something new to them. Patricia, watching from the sidelines, marveled at how naturally the young prince understood that sharing created more happiness than hoarding. George had found his own path, as his parents predicted he would. The 11-year-old prince had become passionate about environmental conservation and climate change issues. He started a recycling program at his school and gave a presentation to his classmates about sustainable practices. While his focus was different from his younger siblings, he drew inspiration from their example of turning concern into action. The 3 children had developed a friendly but supportive dynamic around their charitable interests. They would discuss their experiences over family dinners, sharing what they had learned and encouraging each other. George taught Charlotte and Louis about environmental issues while they shared stories about the families they helped. William and Catherine observed these conversations with quiet satisfaction. Seeing their children grow into thoughtful young people, the impact of the original film continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. Schools across Britain had incorporated lessons about empathy and community service into their curricula, often using Charlotte and Louis's story as an example. Teachers reported that students were more engaged when discussing social issues because they could relate to royal children their own age caring about similar problems. Charitable organizations sustained the increased support that had begun. After the film's release, While initial donation spikes had naturally decreased, there remained a significantly higher baseline of support than before. Many donors who had been inspired by Charlotte and Louis continued giving regularly. Volunteer numbers at youth-focused charities had increased substantially. With people citing the young royals as motivation for getting involved, the palace received thousands of letters and messages for RLT and Louis each month. Children from across the country shared their own stories of helping in their communities. Parents wrote expressing gratitude that their children had positive role models who showed compassion rather than just fashion and privilege. The communications team sorted through these messages, selecting special ones to share with the young royals. One particularly touching letter came from a girl named Sophie who lived in a rural community. She explained that watching Charlotte and Louis had inspired her to organize a clothing drive at her small school. Sophie's initiative had collected enough warm winter clothes to help every family in her village who needed them. She wrote that if young royals could help people, then she could too. Charlotte kept Sophie's letter in her journal as a reminder that their actions had inspired others. However, challenges remained. Some media outlets continued to scrutinize every aspect of Charlotte and Louis's public appearances, sometimes with excessive criticism. When Louis was photographed yawning during a long ceremony, tabloids questioned his commitment to royal duties. When Charlotte politely declined to shake hands with someone who approached too aggressively, articles suggested she was becoming snobbish. William and Catherine worked hard to shield their children from this harsh spotlight. The couple had difficult conversations with palace advisors about managing expectations versus protecting childhood innocence. They insisted that Charlotte and Louis should never feel pressured to perform charity work for public approval. The charitable involvement needed to remain something the children genuinely wanted to do, not an obligation that stole their youth. This stance occasionally frustrated advisors who saw opportunities for positive publicity. Catherine became increasingly protective of her children's time and energy. When organizations requested Charlotte and Louis's presence at fundraising galas or high-profile events, the princess mother carefully evaluated whether attendance served her children's interests or exploited them. More often than not, she declined these invitations, preferring the quiet, meaningful work her children did at the community center. William supported his wife's protective stance, while also recognizing that his children were growing up in an era where public engagement was inevitable. He worked with Catherine to find middle ground, allowing the children some public visibility while maintaining strict boundaries. The prince was adamant that Charlotte, Louis, and George should have as normal a childhood as possible, despite their extraordinary circumstances. As Charlotte's 10th birthday approached, she made an unusual request. Instead of a traditional birthday party, she wanted to organize a fundraising event for the community center and other charities helping children. Her parents were initially hesitant, worried this was taking her charitable interests too far. They sat down with Charlotte to ensure this was truly what she wanted, and not what she thought was expected. Charlotte explained her reasoning with the maturity she had developed over recent months. She already had everything she needed, and more. A birthday party would be fun for a day, but helping raise money for organizations doing important work would have lasting impact. She promised her parents she would still have a small celebration with close friends and family, but wanted the main focus to be on raising awareness and funds for causes she cared about. Louis, hearing about his sister's plans, immediately announced he wanted to do the same for his upcoming 7th birthday. The young prince had clearly been influenced by Charlotte's example and wanted to contribute similarly. William and Catherine realized they couldn't discourage its genuine generosity without contradicting the values they had instilled in their children. They agreed to support both children's wishes while ensuring the events didn't become overwhelming. The birthday fundraisers were organized with careful attention to keeping them age-appropriate and fun. Charlotte's event included activities she enjoyed, like a charity bake sale where she helped make treats, and a small concert featuring young musicians. Guests were asked to donate to selected charities instead of bringing gifts. The event raised a substantial amount while still feeling like a celebration, rather than a solemn obligation. Louis's birthday event a few months later had a similar spirit but reflected his personality. He organized a sports day where children from various backgrounds could come play together. Participants were encouraged to seek sponsors for their athletic achievements, with proceeds going to children's hospitals. Louis ran races, played football, and had an absolute blast while raising money for a good cause. His joy was infectious, making everyone who attended feel good about contributing. These birthday celebrations marked a turning point in how the public perceived Charlotte and Louis. They were no longer just cute royal children or symbols of privilege, trying to appear relatable. They had become genuine examples of young people using their advantages to benefit others. Even former critics had to acknowledge the consistency and authenticity of the children's charitable engagement. As the year drew to a close, the Wales family gathered for their traditional Christmas preparations at Sandringham. King Charles hosted the extended royal family for the holiday season, and there was much to discuss and celebrate. The king spoke privately with William and Catherine about how proud he was of his grandchildren and how they were modernizing the monarchy's relevance. Charlotte, Louis, and George spent Christmas morning exchanging gifts with their cousins and then volunteering at a local charity that provided Christmas dinners to people experiencing homelessness. The children helped serve food, sang carols, and spent time talking with guests. It had become a family,